From my experience, nearly every home in America is toxic or semi-toxic, but how did we get there? We'd like to show you how toxicity happens and what that means to you and your family. It's an important study. It's something you really need to know about. Trying to explain toxicity is a difficult concept. Maybe we should back up a little bit and see how very small things impact us on a very large level. Now, you might think about some of the recent floods that we've seen across the country and wonder exactly what all that has to do with toxicity. But it all starts with a raindrop. Very small, in the millions and billions and trillions of rain that is falling somewhere. And they all begin to rush down and form streams, and those streams become larger streams and then rivers. And those rivers start overflowing their banks, and before long, we have a flood that is taking out homes and towns and making a mess of nearly everything. It all started with a very small item in the scope of what really is going on. And the same thing is true when we talk about the toxicity of your home and how that affects you. Now, I see that there is a certain number of things that we need to consider when we talk about this, and one of them is the toxicity level of your house. And I've tried to illustrate this on a scale of 0 to 10, because we understand that kind of marginal scale. And homes will vary. None of them are going to be an absolute 0 unless you live in some type of clean room laboratory or a hospital surgical ward, but you're going to have some level of toxicity, like you have some level of dust no matter what you do. And it's just part of what goes on. Or there are germs, bacteria, and virus in every home, no matter how much you've sanitized. Now, if you neglect these things, they become much larger compounding problems. And this is kind of what toxicity is. It's like the dust built up in your home. It's like the bacteria or virus that goes around and begins to impact our lives. And but it's done on very microscopic and elemental scale. The second thing is, I believe that people have a grade as well. That if we use the same 0 to 10, we'll find some people who are already overloaded with we'll find some people who are already overloaded as far as their immune system, and they can't handle that. Now, I can eat peanuts, and it's really not a problem for me. There are stories of a girl who kissed a boy who previously ate a peanut snack. And while she didn't eat the peanuts, having kissed the boy, she goes into a severe anaphylactic shock. And that's an example of what goes on. An allergy is often an overreaction to normal and common things that we don't really worry about so much. So peanuts don't bother me, but they will bother another person extremely bad. So on that scale that we're talking about, some people are very much immune to much of the trouble that are around them. And they don't have to worry about it. They don't have to think about it. They might imagine that everybody else who complains about it are just complainers. Well, in fact, if we have a situation where the home is, let's say, on the order of a 6 out of 10 as far as toxicity, which is not terrible, but not great, and the man is an 8 as far as his toleration, because he's higher in durability than the house, he doesn't really see a problem. It doesn't bother him unless for some reason he's feeling bad or weak or sick at that time. It may start to bother him a little bit. By correspondence, women tend to have a more sensitive system, and they can pick up on things more readily than men do. And so let's say that the woman is a 5 or a 4 in a house that's a 6. When we do these comparisons, we now understand that the house at a 6, the man at an 8, and the woman at a 5 or 4 are going to have totally different experiences. She's going to be having reactions that are respiratory, itchy eyes, different things as far as nausea, fatigue, unable to sleep well, general irritability that goes on. Those who have chronic illnesses have their immune system under attack, and they're trying to get better, and so they're down maybe to a 3. and some might be down to a 2 with chronic illnesses. And so that level 6 toxicity house is really a liability to them, whereas for many of the folks who are in the healthier mode don't see that. So we've got to understand some of this. Now, up until lately, it's been very difficult for us to assess how do we know that the house is a 6? How do we know that it's a 2? How do we know that it's a 10? Well, it's been difficult because all of this is pretty much invisible. It's tasteless, it's colorless for the most part, and this kind of distribution, because we're talking about parts per million and parts per billion. But it still becomes a factor. It's kind of like a disease that comes along and it will invade your family. When you get one family member, they kind of infect the whole house, and eventually the other families start picking it up. Because of the proximity, because we've had a higher level of infection going on, we've got to do more or expect the consequences. So now we're talking about some of the things that begin to see in real life. We now have testing equipment that will test for the toxicity. One of the most common telltale chemicals or VOCs that we look for is formaldehyde. And formaldehyde is just about ubiquitous. It's in so many things that we use on a day-by-day basis. It's remarkable. They use it in manufacturing of so many things because it's a curing and drying agent, and it has certain properties that really allow manufacturers to make things more quickly, dry more quickly, get them out on the field more quickly. But when we get those items, we now are exposed to what's called the off-gassing of this. And so we see formaldehyde being one of the leading things. It's even in cleaning products and solvents. It's just so many things. It becomes a litany of numerous items that we don't really want to labor that much. But believe me, it's a major issue. And formaldehyde is a proven carcinogen. It certainly sets off our immune system along with a lot of other things that are involved in there. And so we can test for what's called VOCs, particularly formaldehyde, and TVOCs, which are benzenes, toluenes, chlorines, all the butyls, the ethyls. They all get into our homes, and they begin to incrementally raise the level. In a brand new house, a lot of the building products that were put in there, from the carpet to the paint to even the particle board, the cabinets, the furniture, all of these things have formaldehyde in them, along with other ingredients that we bring in. A lot of your cleaning products have this in them. And we find that if you go through a list, you'll see that there are a ton of things that can build toward a toxic home. And like I explained, those millions and billions of raindrops that form into streams and then rivers, and then the rivers overflow their boundaries and become a huge flood, affecting our lives in terrible ways. These incrementally devastating items that we add in after time are going to have an impact on our lives. And so we really need to consider toxicity more than we do many other things. Let me explain one other item when it comes to toxicity. Mold, for example, not only produces mold and mold spores, the seeds of the mold, but they also produce something called mycotoxins. And as you might guess, mycotoxins are toxins. They're poisons. And they begin to influence us. And when we see that there is mold growing in a house, it's not only producing millions of these mold spores, but they're also producing these mycotoxins, and this stuff can make you sick. So we want to look at this as an overall factor of what's going on. If we're spraying pesticides around, if we're using strong chemicals like bleach and Lysol and a lot of the things you get off the shelf that are supposedly so effective, but they're chemically rich in how they're composed, and you can smell them, that smell, that strong smell that you're getting is a VOC. And this is not good for you, because you wouldn't want to put your nose over the top of a bleach bottle and take a deep breath. That's kind of a warning signal that it's not good for you. So all of these things begin to build up until we find ourselves with a toxic or semi-toxic home. And that in itself is not the issue, because now we have a house at a certain level of toxicity, and we might find some people in the whole family, as it were, who are quite healthy. Their immune system is good. They're doing very well for themselves. They eat well. They exercise, whatever it might be, and it's not bothering these individuals yet. But as our immune system ages, it weakens. And over a period of time, sickness and age and certain amount of overexposure in other parts of our lives because we've been exposed to so many things, eventually we start getting to here. Now things are bothering us and we wonder why. And it's often because we're not tolerating this level of toxicity. And in the meantime, by the way, everything you bring into the house rarely leaves unless it's going down the drain or out in the trash. All those bottles that you bring in of cleaning products and materials that you bring in, if they're off-gassing, if they're creating VOCs, if there's mold in the house, if it becomes part of what goes on, these VOCs that are gases at this particular point don't simply go into oblivion. They actually crystallize into the dust and the dirt and the walls and the surfaces of the house. So much of the toxicity is kind of everywhere throughout the house. So we have to kind of consider that this is all a factor for what's going on. And what is the level of our house? Well, we need to test for that. And there are a number of tests that can really help us discern what's going on in that home. And it takes a professional with the right kind of meters and testing equipment to make that happen. And then we have to take a look at the individuals. Why are they struggling with this? And it is often going to be kind of a corresponding relationship that allows us to begin to put a finger on this. And then I call it the journey back. And in the journey back, we got here over the years. And I believe that everybody needs to take a 3-year journey back to where they were, because it's going to be done in small steps. We can't really do an overall conversion of everything in just a day or two. We really have to look at this as a good start when we come in and we detoxify and decontaminate everything. We call it the total D&D with Decon 5, and it makes for healthy air and a healthy life. So we want to do this to kind of kickstart everything off. We want to have a whole system comes in, top to bottom, really detoxifying and decontaminating the whole house with the total D&D. Now, that's part of the system. And then, of course, we give you some guidelines on how we can actually improve this and bring down the level of toxicity in your home so that no matter who you are, you're going to find that your experience, if you're strong or if you're not as strong or you're having some difficulties in life, that you're still above the environmental threat that's coming because of the toxicity level of your house. And I hope this helps you understand why sometimes you're feeling the fatigue, why you're feeling sometimes bouts of nausea for no reason, why your eyes bother you, why there may be skin rashes for some reason, why it is just basically like someone is holding you back and holding you down and smothering you in a sense. Literally, when we sleep, if our bodies are fighting off these toxins, we're not even sleeping so well. So one of the symptoms we find is that people sleep better, they seem to feel better, their energy is returning, they're not as troubled by the things in their lives as they used to be. And it's not about medicine in this case. It's really about reducing the level of toxicity in the home. And then at the same time, we try to improve you and how you're responding in all this. And we've got a whole list of things that will take you on that journey back to health. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of things that doctors can do and chiropractors can do. People in the health arts and in the wellness industry will be able to help you with diets and vitamins and supplements and exercise and so on. But let's look at a few fundamentals of this. Your environment is important. Those things that you live around in such consistency. You sleep in these areas. You eat in these areas. You spend your time in these areas. And one of the classic symbols, by the way, is if you go to other places and feel better, and you come to home or to your work and feel worse on a consistent basis, that's a classic issue about how we detect chemical sensitivity, because the home and or the workplace may have levels of toxicity. When you're away from those areas, you feel better. If you're outside, you're feeling better. If you're in some other place, you're feeling better. But when you come back to these areas and the same problems begin to haunt you, that's a classic indicator there's a toxic issue in your home or in your workplace. We'd like to help you out more. There's a directory on this website that will help you find a qualified indoor air quality specialist in your area. Give them a call. They'll be happy to work with you. I believe it can make a huge difference in your life.